This presentation is based on a report that we gave at the Summit for the Central Valley in Fresno in October of 2019, just a little bit more than a year ago. And so in this report, we had found that California and the Central Valley had experienced sustained growth alongside high unemployment, low wages, and low homeownership rates. This is important because for a long time we've had this narrative that we need to have economic growth in the valley. There's just not enough growth. We need to bring businesses, and really the truth is that there's always been a high level of economic activity alongside unemployment and low wages and low homeownership rates. And this becomes important because later, as you'll hear from Janine Nakasi at Fresno State, she's going to be talking about the crisis with evictions and with housing burden in the Central Valley during the pandemic. But I wanted to just present, the idea that during good times, the Central Valley was plagued with having a very low homeownership rate and a high rate of multiple family households. So in my first slide here, we're looking at gross domestic product growth per capita by select states. And you can see that California, in the most recent county level data that was available from the U.S. Bureau of Economic Analysis, had growth that was above the other 4 largest states in the nation. When we look specifically at regions, we can see that during the same time period, the Central Valley had the second greatest economic growth of all regions, second only to the Bay Area. But when we look at the rate of subfamilies, of multiple families per household, we see that California was second highest in the nation, higher than any of the other large states. There were 9.3 multiple families per every 100 households in California. The Central Valley had 10.7 subfamilies or multiple families per every 100 households. This was second among California's 12 regions, second only to the Inland Empire, which had 11 subfamilies per 100 households. Merced at 12.6 subfamilies per 100 households had the highest rate of any county in the state. Fresno's subfamily rate was also very high. It was 8th highest among the 58 counties in the state. There were 11.1 multiple families per every 100 households in Fresno. Now, this becomes important because California's home ownership rate is one of the lowest in the nation. And when we adjust for the fact that there are multiple families living in the same households, we actually see that California's home ownership rate is indeed the lowest of all states, lower than even than New York. Officially, 54% of California households own their home, and this was second to New York. But when we adjust for multiple families living together in the same household, we actually see that the rate of homeownership is even lower. It's 49.4%. Here in the Central Valley, the rate was similar. It's 49.5% when we adjust for multiple family households. And this is actually third in the state, only behind Los Angeles and the San Diego Imperial Valley area. So out of 12 regions, the Central Valley had the third lowest, the third lowest homeownership, or you could say the third highest rate of rentership. Specifically, Fresno Fresno's rate of adjusted homeownership rate was 47.4%. And now when we look at wages, we also see that full-time workers earns the second lowest wages in the state. So although there's the narrative that the cost of living is lower in the Central Valley, um, because wages are actually the second lowest in the state, and so this is part of the reason why the rate of home ownership is so low, is because as low as the cost of homes are in the Central Valley, wages are even lower. So, in conclusion, I just wanted to restate what we had found in our report, that the Central Valley has the second highest economic growth in the state. Prior to the pandemic, it had the second highest economic growth in the state, but it also had the highest unemployment rate, the second highest multiple family rate, and the third lowest home ownership rate. And so going into the crisis, as roughly 1 out of every 4 workers have lost their jobs, as roughly half of all households have had either job loss or income reduction. These are the circumstances that a large number of low-income Central Valley households are facing as renters. Thank you. A large number of the jobs that are in the Central Valley are frontline essential work in either agriculture or meat, food processing, meat packing. And so these jobs that are frontline essential jobs on average pay lower wages. And so in part, the reason why there's such a disparity in the rate of home ownership across the state is because of the jobs that are available in the region. With jobs in the food chain, it is very often that that workers cannot even afford to buy their own food. A large percentage of people who work in agriculture or in food processing have to subside on food stamps. In my presentation, I talked about how we have the third highest rate of rentership in the state. This is in large part where this comes from, because workers earn such low wages that they cannot afford to buy their own homes. So we have a large number of renters. And this becomes a problem during the pandemic because the federal policies that protected homeowners from missing mortgage payments didn't extend to renters. And so there was a policy gap that the state tried to fulfill by placing a moratorium on evictions. And as Janine will talk about later, it's imperative that we implement, that we renew this policy. Otherwise, we can expect mass evictions in the next couple months.
Hello, my name is Jessica. I am a hardworking 25-year-old mother of 6 who was born and raised in Fresno. I graduated high school, I work full-time, and I am a community advocate with Faith in the Valley who believes in caring for my community and neighbors. I am one of many that are speaking out, asking for help, because I know it only takes one eviction on someone's record to change their lives forever. When it happened to me, I reached out to all the resources, but no one could help me. The eviction on my record made it impossible to find a place for me and my family to live. I didn't know about it until years later. Then when you go to court, it doesn't matter how much proof you take in, because when I took everything I thought I needed, my eviction wasn't removed. The landlords are the only ones that have the power to remove any eviction. Therefore, in my case, my eviction was never removed, and my kids are the ones that who most are the ones that are suffering the most. I am speaking out because I remember being homeless with my children and having to take them baths in the public restrooms at the park. I love my children and I'll do anything to protect them. And I didn't want anyone else's kids. I don't want anyone else's kids to experience what my kids had to go through. As a parent, you just want to do anything to protect them, your kids. It's been really hard trying to protect my children during this statewide emergency. Just this year, I was forced to move out by my landlord, and we had no place to go. I did everything I was supposed to do. I paid my rent, but my lease ended. I was served with a notice to vacate for no reason, right? At the beginning of COVID-19 pandemic, our landlord wanted us to put our children's children's life at risk as he refused our rent. I should not be asked to violate the shelter in place and the CDC guidelines and put my children at risk. No parent should. I should not have been forced to choose between my housing and my children's health and safety just because I am a renter. No parent should. In April, I attended my first GDC, my first, sorry, on April, I attended my first Right to Counsel LLC meeting, and I learned I can use my voice to make a change for myself and others. I had the opportunity to speak at the council meeting. I was so nervous, but I was proud of myself for giving my testimony and helping to pass 2 items. Councilwoman Esmeralda Sonia lifted up my testimony. I worked with leaders to write a Fresno B op-ed. It was my first time doing something like this. It was an amazing experience. I went on to be on the radio station interview with Kevin 88.1. Right now, I am continue to work on the housing LOC, and I attend meetings and motivate our space. We are in a statewide emergency. This is a time when we need to be together and help one another. Many people needed the help before COVID, and now due to this crisis, because people need even more help. Many people have lost their jobs. Prices are rising sky high, leaving many people without the ability to buy food and essentials, or even pay their bills. I believe you're able to help. I believe if you're able to help make a change, why not do it? Use the power we all have to help our community and families. The bottom line is everyone needs a home and a place to call their kingdom, because that's what I call my home, my kingdom. Thank you, and I appreciate it. And thank you for taking the time to hear me. So my rent was refused for no reason. I paid my rent on time. I even gave my deposit, everything I gave up front all the time, and there was just no reason. He just wanted the home, and it was through COVID-19. That was the pandemic, and I had to move out, and I had everything in boxes. Everything was packed. I was like, I had barely gave birth to my child. He was a newborn at the time, and it was just so I don't know what to do. I was stressful. I didn't want to think about the time when we were homeless, living in the streets. It's just an ugly feeling when you're in that situation. My kids were in diapers. We had to sleep in cars, and it's just a lot that goes behind it. And that's why I'm here, to one of many voices to speak out, because I need this help for me and other people in the future.
My experience was I had been living in my apartment for over 20 years. And then I've come to find out I paid my rent on time. I wasn't on drugs or alcohol, any of that. I was a model senior citizen for a ministry in the church. And all of a sudden I was told to fill out some papers, Section 8 papers. And I filled them out. Then later on, I found out you don't qualify. So they gave me November the 12th to move out. I was hurt. I applied, I moved out. And then I found a room. I moved in there. I was mistreated. This lady, she had cameras all over the place, little burglar alarms and all of that. So I finally moved out. I said, it's better for me to stay in my car. So I moved in my car, and I stayed in my car for about 10 months. It was a nightmare. Every time I tried to sleep at night, police or security guards would come by and say, you got to move, you can't sleep here. And I would move. And sometimes I would see thugs in the cars would pull up behind me, and they'd be whispering to one another about, and then I see them get out of the car. Then I say, oh, I better get out of here. Sometimes I'd be trying to sleep, and next thing I know, I hear somebody pop one of my hubcaps off. Or else somebody trying to open the door while I'm trying to sleep. And so I had to keep moving. And not only that, I was afraid to eat. I lost a lot of weight because where could I use the restroom? The businesses wouldn't even allow me to use them. They say, you got to pay in order to use the restroom. And then I would go to the porta potty, and guess what? They were filthy. They wasn't even fit for a dog to use. And so I have kept moving. And I said, Lord, you got to help me. I can't do this alone. And so as I continue to, and then not only that, what really hurt me, at least I had a car to sleep in. when I saw elderly Black women, Mexican women, white women sleeping in cardboard boxes. And these are senior citizens who had families, who worked hard, who raised their families, who helped build this country, who helped pay taxes and all of that, out on the streets, and told you can't stay here. You got to move. And not only that, guess what? Sometimes the garbage man or whatever, they would come by and just take the little cardboard houses and pick them up and carry them on the way. And they was left out there in the cold. I said, oh God, help us. If this is what the society has come to, Lord help us. And so I continue to move. But I said, one thing, I'm not gonna lose my self-esteem. I'm somebody. There's somebody. And I want the kids to know, or the families to know, this could happen to anybody, not just me. It's just, life is like a wheel. One day you're on top, and the wheel turn, guess what? It's hitting the dust. So any one of us can have this experience. And so what I'm saying right now is, have a heart, do the right thing. Look out for the citizens. Look out for these people who have built this country, who have paid taxes, who have raised their children. And guess what? The children, most of them, a lot of children have rejected them. God have mercy upon us. And so what I'm saying today, I lived in fear. I never knew where I was going to go. I never knew what I was going to do. I couldn't relax because I had to stay on the move. You can't stay here. The light, flashing light in my face. Oh God. And this is what this society has come to. And so I make a plea to you right now. Do the right thing. Care for the senior citizens. They have built this country. They have paid taxes. They raised their families. And the society is known by how they treat the elderly, the senior citizens. It'll go down in history. So this is all I want to say is, do the right thing. Help us. Because guess what? We pay our taxes. We're willing to pay our taxes. We're willing to be law-abiding. We're willing to help each other. Now, help us. That's all I have to say.
I organize specifically in the small area of, it's a Merced County. And I wanted to, more than anything, I'm coming in to share the story of one of the residents that I've had the opportunity to work alongside with and help out. She wants her name to remain anonymous because she is an undocumented farm worker. And she's a mother of 2 smaller children, also a wife. And earlier in the pandemic, what her situation was that she lives with her husband and rents a small trailer home. And when the pandemic first hit, her husband was employed through the landlord that owned the property there. And he was a dairy worker. So because he worked for the landlord, his rent and utilities were paid through kind of like the work that he did. And she was a seasonal farm worker. Every time when the season would start, she would usually go further down south, and she would take her children with her. She would rent a room out there. That's what she would do, because there are certain programs that as an undocumented individual, even though it is for farm workers that it is available to, it's not for undocumented folks. So she kind of would have to network and figure out where she would be renting a room from. So when the pandemic first hit, she was impacted through, as a farm worker, the hours or the season started in a little later. Um, and they were also low wage earners. When all of this happened, the landlord then decided to sell everything, and so it changed. Everything changed ownership, and they were told that they had 2 months to find a new location. So immediately when that happened, they like realized that the prices of rent, so I forgot to mention they lived in an unincorporated area of the county. So as they looked and tried to look for housing elsewhere, they realized that the income that they were currently making was not affordable. Like they could not afford to move anywhere else. So that's when they first reached out to Faith in the Valley to see how we can support. I myself tried to connect them with legal resources. And fortunately, the situation, it was able to work out for them where they had to directly speak with the new landlord. But these stories are so common in the Central Valley. Hers is just one of many. And situations like this, especially for undocumented workers, they're a little bit hard because there are so many resources that are available, but so many that they are not able to apply for. So we actually started to advocate locally in Merced County for a rent, mortgage, and utilities program too. And along with other folks, other partners in the community here, we were able to, it started since way back early in the pandemic that we started to advocate for something that was also accessible to undocumented people. So luckily, but just as of last month, there was a rent, mortgage, and utilities assistance program that passed through the county. And so we're hoping that this would be some sort of a alleviation, for now, for people, but we know that we have yet to prepare for what's to come. As the evictions again will be, we're gonna see a wave of evictions happen.
Faith in the Valley, we are a grassroots community organization across the Central Valley. We organize in Kern, Fresno, Merced, Stanislaus, and San Joaquin County, and we bring people together. We organize power from the ground up. We pass policy, we do research, trying to advance economic and racial justice across all of our counties. We have done a series of community-based research reports, a series called Evicted in the Central Valley. We did one in Fresno, one in Kern, and one in San Joaquin County. And this is the labor of students and community organizers and residents and people coming together to systematically document the eviction crisis, the housing crisis in the Central Valley. We analyzed thousands of court records. We have found that evictions happen at a higher rate in the Central Valley than in anywhere else in California. Prior to COVID, this is a snapshot right here of what the crisis looked like even before we had the pandemic. So we had thousands of households that were being evicted annually across the Central Valley. In 2019, when the Central Valley had its lowest level of unemployment since before the Great Recession, this is a snapshot. And just the 5 counties where we organized, there were 12,000 12,000 eviction cases that were filed with the courts. And the research shows that there are likely twice as many evictions that happen informally outside of the courts. And so this is the picture of what it looked like before COVID. And what we all know is that COVID has compounded and exacerbated the crisis that we were already experiencing. This right here is a snapshot of unemployment, like initial unemployment claims that were filed. So what you see here is in 2019, you know, this is a picture of what unemployment, like those initial unemployment filings look like. And then March of 2020, when we see, you know, the statewide shelter in place, when we see the closure of businesses and our schools, then we see a spike, right? So beginning, you know, in April, we see nearly over a 600% increase in initial unemployment filings. In September, it peaked to nearly 650,000. And this is really important. The reason why we bring information like this is because we're always sitting in meetings with elected officials wanting to pass strong policies and protections to safeguard our families, and we're always being asked to provide evidence. This is compelling evidence of what the state of the economy looks like and how many people are being impacted right now because of the pandemic. And so then we have a snapshot here where Dr. Amber Crowell out of Fresno State, she's our regional housing coordinator. She adapted the methodology from the Bay Area Equity Atlas so that we could try to get a sense of how many renter households in our counties were vulnerable to eviction. And so what we find is that if we don't have strong protections, eviction ordinances and moratoriums to keep our families housed, if we don't have enough rent and mortgage and utility relief to keep families in their home, then we estimate that 100,000 households in the Central Valley are vulnerable to eviction. But let's be clear, these are only households. This is not that one person lives in every one of these households. So at minimum, we're talking about 300,000 individuals or people who in our community, in these 5 counties, who are vulnerable and at risk of being put out of their homes. So in addition to analyzing court records, we spent over 3 months in eviction court observing, systematically documenting what is the process, what happens when a family member or someone shows up to eviction court. It is an eviction mill. Within, literal minutes, the next one, the next one, the next one, people, decisions being made and people being put out of their homes. So here what we're looking at is in 2019, this is the most active landlord attorney in Fresno County, handled 643 cases, whereas the most active defendant attorney, Tenants who had an attorney, handled 6 cases. These are huge disparities. This is when we look at the picture overall. Out of 1,000 court records that we analyzed for Fresno County, and we did this across the board in all of our counties, 73%, that's 730 landlords who had an attorney in eviction court and less than 1% of tenants. This is the norm. The national data shows that 90% of landlords have attorneys in eviction court and less than 10% of tenants do. So there's a huge misconception, things like law and order, right? They make us believe that if anybody that can afford an attorney, one was going to be appointed to you. That is a victory that was won in criminal cases, in a very few civil areas. But when your home is at stake, somebody can be arrested for stealing a small amount of food and they're entitled to an attorney. Thankfully, I want everyone to be entitled to an attorney who is going to be able to represent them if they find themselves in any court. The laws are there to be able to protect us But if a person doesn't have access to an attorney, the laws are almost valueless. So there's a huge misconception, right? And in California, we need to urge our California state legislature to extend AB 3088. It's currently AB 15 and AB 16. So those are the two policies that we need to be passed before January 31st. We also need more rent, mortgage, and utility relief. We don't want to see our mom and pop landlords who are relying on that income because their pensions have failed them and their, the cost of living continues to go up and they're being priced out. So they need those homes. It's a source of income. We don't want to see those homes being lost and large portfolios being built up by, corporations like Invitation Homes and the Blackstone Group and Colony. We're trying to track right now to see how many of those folks are coming into the Central Valley and buying up our properties. How many more absentee landlords are we going to see if we don't save our homes right now? And right now, if somebody is served with loses an eviction court, it's a 7-year eviction record. And there's also a 10-year adverse credit component to that. What we found in our data is that tenants are being ordered to pay sometimes as high as 25, a compounded burden effect, which means that if they owe $200, they fell behind in rent and they owe $200, by the time they go through the court process and you add legal fees, you add, court fees, the compounded burden that those families are paying in some cases is 25 points higher than what originally triggered the eviction. So we are calling for an expungement. Why is it that if a family falls short on eviction, they have to be served with a 7 and 10-year sentence that's going to follow them around? It doesn't make any sense. So we're calling for a right to counsel. So that way, every single person who is served with an eviction notice, they have a right to an attorney if they find themselves in eviction court. We're also calling for, at minimum, in 2017, we in California, we passed I think it's called AB 2819. This was the masking law that said, hey, we're going to mask the eviction court cases for a period of 60 days to give the tenants a fair chance to fight their case. And if they win, we're going to keep it masked. Well, when we look at our eviction data, we were, after the Great Recession, a period of 5 years minimum before we started to see the evictions coming down. So what we want to see included in AB 15 and AB 16, in addition to right to counsel, we want to see at minimum a 5-year masking of all eviction cases across the board, across California. And when we come out of this, we want to see changes that take a 7-year eviction record and maybe move it down to 6 months. Why does it have to be 7 years?